The year is 1847. London, at the apex of its glittering season, was less a city and more a meticulously choreographed performance of wealth, power, and eligible bloodlines. Every carriage rolling through Mayfair carried its weight in silk, expectation, and unspoken ambition. The air itself was thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp, exciting tang of social combat. Drawing rooms buzzed with the practiced exchange of flatteries and subtle intrigues, while ballrooms pulsed with the relentless pursuit of advantageous alliances. Yet, amidst this dazzling spectacle, one young woman, Miss Nelly Fenring, stood out not for novelty but for flawless, sensible perfection. At 23, she occupied the desired golden middle ground, neither a frantic debutante nor a wallflower nearing spinsterhood. She represented the ideal convergence of youth and judicious maturity, a woman perfectly formed for the role society had prescribed, that of a future countess. Her lineage was impeccable. Her father, George Fenring, the Marquis of Fenring, was an influential figure whose pragmatism was valued highly in the House of Lords. He was a man who understood realpolitik in every arena, from the parliamentary floor to the marriage mart. His widowed state, following Nelly's mother's passing when Nelly was 14, meant his guidance had been singularly focused on securing her an impeccable future. Nelly was the polished result, fluent in both French and Italian, proficient on the pianoforte with competent, if not passionate, skill, and capable of discussing everything from literature and estate management to contemporary politics with equal ease and flawless deportment. Her beauty was of the serene, classical variety, honey blonde. Hair dressed in elegant coils, features that suggested both intelligence and admirable restraint, and grey-blue eyes that seemed perpetually calm, belying any deeper emotional turbulence. Nelly was, to the palpable satisfaction of her father and the grudging envy of many of her peers, securely spoken for. Her betrothed, Lord Edmund Hartley, heir to the Earl of Ashton, had courted her with quiet, consistent determination for the better part of 2 years. Edmund represented the very definition of respectable comfort and stability. He was handsome in a pleasant, unremarkable way, possessed of a generous, well-managed estate in Hampshire, genuinely kind-hearted and utterly respectable. His name was untainted by so much as a whiff of scandal. He was devoted to his widowed mother, treated his tenants fairly, and attended church regularly. When Edmund had formally requested Nelly's hand the previous autumn, the Marquis accepted with enthusiasm. The betrothal was announced in December, and the wedding was firmly set for July, after the season had drawn to its natural close. "You are fortunate, my dear," her father had told her on the night of the announcement, his grey whiskers bristling with satisfaction. "Lord Edmund is a solid man. You shall be a countess one day, with an excellent household and a husband who will treat you well. What more could a sensible woman desire?" Nelly had smiled and agreed, because that, she knew, was precisely what sensible women did. She knew rationally that she had secured a good life, predictable, secure, and entirely reasonable. They would have children, manage estates, host dinners, and grow old together in comfortable, quiet companionship. And yet sometimes late at night, when the grand Fenring townhouse in Berkeley Square was silent, and the London fog pressed against her window panes, Nelly lay wide awake and wondered why her heart felt so peculiarly, achingly empty. "You're being foolish," she would silently chastise herself in the darkness, pulling the silken covers closer. "This is what every woman wants. You should be grateful." And she was grateful. She truly was. The unsettling emptiness was just a minor defect in an otherwise perfect arrangement, a flaw she could surely ignore forever. The unexpected seismic shift in her controlled universe arrived during the second week of April. Nelly was seated in the sun-drenched morning room with her companion, Miss Hazel Whimsy, reviewing invitations for the week's engagements. Hazel was a distant cousin, the orphaned daughter of Nelly's mother's second cousin, who had come to live with the Fenrings when Nelly was 19. At 8 and 20, Hazel was Nelly's practical anchor, sharp-eyed, loyal, and possessing a social astuteness that bordered on uncanny. She had warm brown hair, always neatly pinned, a smattering of freckles across her nose, and a mind that processed details with swift clarity. "Lady Peaton's musical on Thursday," Hazel was saying, tracing a finger down the gilt-edged card. "Dreadfully dull, but your father requires your attendance. And the Duchess of Thornbury's ball on Saturday. Oh, that's Lord Edmund now." Indeed, the butler was ushering Edmund into the room. He looked particularly well turned out in a deep blue coat, his light brown hair carefully brushed, his smile genuinely warm. Nelly set down her teacup and rose to greet him. "Miss Fenring, Miss Whimsy, good morning," he greeted them. "Lord Edmund, this is an unexpected pleasure," Nelly replied politely. Edmund's grey eyes were bright with an unusual, almost boyish excitement. "I hope I'm not intruding. I've come with rather excellent news, actually. My closest friend has just returned to London after 3 years abroad, and I'm eager for you to meet him." "A friend?" Nelly asked, her tone polite. "My dearest friend in the world," Edmund said warmly, drawing closer. "We were at Eton together, then Oxford. He's been travelling on the continent, Vienna, Rome, Paris, but he's finally come home. I've spoken of him often, I think. Vincent Montigue, the Duke of Ravenmore." Hazel's head snapped up, the movement quick and telling. Even Nelly felt a small flutter of recognition. Everyone in London society knew of the Duke of Ravenmore, though he was more of a formidable myth than a man. He had inherited his title nearly 5 years ago at 4 and 20, yet had consistently preferred his extensive European properties and business interests over the suffocating confines of the London season. Rumour painted him as wealthy beyond imagining, devastatingly attractive, and to the despair of ambitious mamas, utterly uninterested in marriage. "I should very much like to meet him," Nelly said carefully, "though I confess I'm surprised he is not married. Surely the matchmaking mamas have been relentless." Edmund chuckled. "Oh, they have been, but Vincent is particular. He's always said he'd only marry when he found a woman of exceptional quality, someone with wit and character, not just beauty and breeding. I've told him all about you, of course, and he's most eager to meet the woman who has captured my heart." Something in Edmund's tone, proud, affectionate, utterly innocent, made Nelly's chest tighten with a strange, unnamed emotion. Perhaps it was a premonition, or perhaps it was guilt, though she had nothing yet to be guilty about. "When shall this meeting occur?" she asked, her voice steady. "Tonight, if you're amenable," Edmund said. "There's a reception at Lord Ashford's house in Grosvenor Square. Vincent will be there, and I. And thought I should like my 2 favourite people in the world to know one another." "Of course," Nelly agreed, offering him a practice smile. "I shall look forward to it." After Edmund departed, pressing a courtly kiss to Nelly's gloved hand, Hazel fixed her with a long, assessing look. "What is it?" Nelly asked, attempting a lightness she did not feel. "Nothing," Hazel said slowly, her eyes not leaving Nelly's face. "Only the Duke of Ravenmore. They say he's quite formidable." "All dukes are formidable, Hazel. It comes with the title," Nelly dismissed. "No," Hazel said thoughtfully. "I mean formidable in a different way. I've heard he's brilliant, yes, and absolutely ruthless in business, but with a strange, almost dangerous sort of honour about him, and they say women find him difficult to resist." "How fortunate, then, that I am already spoken for," Nelly said lightly, though something cold and sharp twisted strangely in her stomach. "Yes," Hazel murmured, her look lingering. "How fortunate. Lord Ashford's reception was the very apotheosis of a London social event, crowded, glittering with too many jewels, and slightly too warm from the crush of bodies. Nelly arrived with her father and Hazel, her gown a masterpiece of ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, her hair dressed simply but elegantly. She wore her mother's pearl necklace, her only truly precious. Heirloom. Edmund found them almost immediately, his face alight with pleasure. "Miss Fenring, you look exquisite. Come, Vincent is just over here. I've been keeping him from the predatory mammas all evening." He guided her through the relentless crush of guests toward a quieter corner near the tall windows overlooking the garden. And there, standing with a glass of wine in hand, was a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Vincent Montigue, the Duke of Ravenmore, was not handsome in the conventional soft sense of Lord Edmund. His features were far too strong, too severe for mere prettiness. He was tall, undeniably broad-shouldered, with black hair that fell just slightly, longer than was fashionable, suggesting a complete indifference to the trivialities of style. His face was a study in hard angles, a sharp jaw, high cheekbones, and a powerful nose that had clearly been broken and poorly set at least once. But it was his eyes that arrested her gaze and held it, deep, penetrating black framed by dark brows, burning. With an intelligence so fierce it was almost intimidating. He wore his evening clothes with a careless elegance that suggested both vast wealth and a total lack of concern for others' opinions. Everything about him radiated a chilling form of power, not the inherited, effortless entitlement of most aristocrats, but something earned, fought for, and utterly undeniable. When his gaze met hers across the remaining distance, Nelly felt the world not just tilt, but shatter. It was not simple attraction. It was recognition, absolute and terrifying. It felt as though some essential, sleeping part of her soul had waited her entire life for this exact moment. And now that it had arrived, everything else, her duty, her betrothal, her entire future, fell away into stark insignificance. "Vincent," Edmund's voice seemed to come from a long distance away. "May I present my betrothed, Miss Nelly Fenring? Nelly, this is his grace, the Duke of Ravenmore, my dearest friend, and the finest man I know." Vincent bowed, the movement precise and controlled. When he straightened, his eyes never left hers. "Miss Fenring," he said. His voice was everything she should have expected, and nothing she was prepared for. Deep, cultured, with a slight underlying roughness beneath the polish that sent a dangerous wave of heat racing down her spine. "Edmund has spoken of little else but you for months. I confess, I am delighted to finally make your acquaintance." There was something in the way he lingered on the word delighted that suggested the emotion was wholly, inadequately insufficient. "Your Grace," Nelly managed. Amazed, her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Lord Edmund has likewise spoken warmly of you. I understand you have been travelling abroad." "I have," Vincent confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "Though I find myself wondering now what took me so long to return home." The words were perfectly polite, appropriate for any social exchange. But the way he looked at her, steady, searching, as though he could see straight through all her carefully composed layers, made them feel like a declaration of war on her peace. Edmund, bless his kind, oblivious heart, noticed nothing amiss. He beamed at them, delighted. "I knew you would get on splendidly. Vincent, you must tell Nelly about Vienna. She adores music, and would be fascinated by your account of the opera there." "I should be honored," Vincent said quietly, still looking at her. Nelly, who prided herself on unshakable composure, felt her cheeks flush warmly under that intense, dark scrutiny. "Perhaps," she managed, using every ounce of training, "Your Grace might favour us with such stories another time. I confess I find myself quite overwhelmed by the heat of the room just now." It was not entirely a lie. She felt feverish, her skin suddenly too tight for her body. "Of course," Vincent said immediately, his concern as sharp as his gaze. "Shall I fetch you some refreshment?" The terrace doors are just there. You might find the air more agreeable outside." "That would be most kind," Nelly accepted, grasping the offered escape. As Vincent moved away toward the refreshment table, Edmund leaned close, his expression concerned. "Are you quite well? You do look rather flushed." "I'm perfectly well," Nelly assured him, forcing a smile. "Only warm, as I said." But beside her, Hazel's eyes were knowing and worried, confirming that her companion had seen everything. The sudden, deep heat in Nelly's cheeks, the tremor in her hands, the way her breath had caught when the Duke's eyes met hers. When Vincent returned with a glass of cool champagne, his fingers brushed hers as he handed it to her. Just the slightest contact through their gloves. Nelly felt it like a brand upon her soul. This was dangerous. This was impossible. This was wrong. And yet, as she stood there between her kind, oblivious betrothed and the dark-eyed Duke, who looked at her as though she were the only woman in the world, Nelly felt something she had never experienced in all her carefully ordered life. She felt awake. She was facing a terrifying, undeniable truth. The sensible, secure future she had embraced was suddenly nothing more than a lifeless backdrop to the potent, forbidden reality standing before her. The perfect Miss Fenring had found her catalyst, and the fragile peace of the London season was about to break. The days that followed Lord Ashford's reception did not settle into a routine. Instead, they passed in a strange, feverish blur for Nelly. She clung desperately to her initial rationalization that her profound reaction to the Duke of Ravenmore was merely shock, the natural human response to encountering a man of such striking, undeniable presence. But her carefully regulated body relentlessly betrayed her lie. Vincent Montigue had, without uttering a single compromising word, transformed her polite existence into an exquisite minefield of psychological torture. 3 days after their introduction, at Lady Peaton's musical, the geometry of their social world became acutely agonizing. Nelly saw Vincent enter from her seat in the 3rd row, dressed in severe black evening clothes that made him look even more imposing. His dark hair brushed back, his expression a fortress of unreadability. She watched every unmarried woman in the room track his movements with predatory, hopeful interest. Her pulse gave a violent, telltale leap. He navigated the room with quiet, magnetic authority, declining several attempts by determined mummers to capture his attention until he reached the vacant seat Edmund had saved for him directly beside Nelly. "Miss Fenring," he said quietly, settling into the chair with fluid, effortless grace. "I trust I have not disturbed your peace." "Not at all, Your Grace," she replied, immensely proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Do you enjoy chamber music?" "I find it depends entirely on the company," Vincent responded, his voice low and for her ears alone. Though he faced forward as the quartet began Haydn's string quartet in C major, Nelly felt the weight of his awareness like a physical touch. Throughout the entire performance, she sat rigid as a statue, every nerve in her body screaming with consciousness of his proximity. His tailored sleeve was mere inches from hers. The subtle scent of his cologne, dark, woody, like cedar and smoke, seemed to fill her lungs with every constricted breath. The air between them was so thick with unspoken tension that it felt volatile, ready to ignite with the smallest spark. When the music finally finished and polite applause filled the room, Vincent leaned toward her just slightly, an intimacy no one else would notice. "You did not hear a single note of that, did you?" he murmured, his voice pitched perfectly for her ear. Nelly's breath hitched. "I find you extremely presumptuous." "Forgive me," Vincent said, straightening, but there was a knowing warmth in his eyes, a heat that suggested he was not sorry at all, only observant. Across the aisle, Hazel watched them, her worry openly etched on her face. The pattern repeated itself with horrifying, deliberate regularity over the following weeks. Wherever Nelly went, Vincent appeared. It began as coincidence, but Nelly gradually understood that his presence was an intentional, calculated siege. Edmund, dear, trusting Edmund, was delighted, often confiding in Nelly as they drove through Hyde Park that Vincent has been alone too long. I think seeing our happiness reminds him of what he's missing. Perhaps it will finally inspire him to seek a wife of his own. Nelly murmured some non-committal reply, her stomach twisting with a growing, darker emotion, jealousy at the thought of Vincent turning his intense focus onto another woman. The torture was exquisite. Every social engagement became a minefield. At the opera, she felt his gaze fixed on her box, not the stage. At garden parties, she would instinctively turn and find him watching her from across the lawn, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning with an unspoken demand. And the truly damning part was that Nelly looked for him everywhere. She entered every ballroom, searching for that dark head above the crowd, drawn to him like iron filings to a lodestone. She was losing the rigorous control she had maintained her entire life. "You must stop this," Hazel told her one night in her chamber, the candlelight burning low. "Stop looking at him the way you do. The Duke is compelling, yes, but you are engaged to Lord Edmund, a good man who loves you and trusts you." "I have done nothing wrong," Nelly insisted, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Not yet," Hazel agreed. "But I see how you look at each other. I see how you both try not to look at each other, which is somehow worse. This cannot continue," Nelly whispered, her hands pressing against her face. "Heavens, Hazel, I know, but I cannot seem to make it stop." Hazel paused, then asked the question that hung in the air like smoke. "Do you love Lord Edmund?" "I respect him. I am fond of him. He will be a good husband," Nelly said finally, avoiding the truth. "I thought I could learn to love him after we wed. Is that not how most marriages work?" "Perhaps," Hazel said gently. "But if you have already met someone who makes you feel—" "Do not say it," Nelly cut her off sharply. If Hazel said it aloud, the truth she felt for Vincent Montigue would become real, undeniable, and Nelly could not afford for that reality to exist. She was the Marquis's daughter, a lady of impeccable reputation, and she would not, could not, be the sort of woman who falls desperately in love with a man who was not her betrothed. Meanwhile, Vincent Montigue was slowly going mad. His careful world, built over 3 years abroad managing fortunes and navigating war-torn regions, had collapsed the instant Nelly Fenring's grey-blue eyes met his across Lord Ashford's drawing room. It was not rational. It was a devastating catastrophe of belonging. He knew with terrifying certainty that she was his, in the sense that her soul was made to recognize his, yet she belonged to Edmund, his closest friend, his brother in everything but blood. To want Nelly was a betrayal of unforgivable dimensions. He was haunted by her, the memory of her subtle rose scent, the intelligent light in her eyes, the raw desire in his dreams where she turned to him instead of Edmund. He woke from these dreams rigid with frustrated passion, hating himself for his dishonor. He kept coming to social events, but the lie that he was supporting his friend was thin. He went because he needed to see her, even if he could not touch her or speak to her freely. Just being in the same room sustained something vital in him. "You seem distracted, old friend," Edmund remarked one afternoon as they rode through Rotten Row. "Yes, everything," Vincent thought fiercely. "I am in love with your betrothed, and it is destroying me." "Only business matters," he said aloud. "Nothing of consequence." Edmund, satisfied, advised him to settle down and find a wife, perhaps among Nelly's circle. Vincent's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. There could be no one else. His heart had recognized its mate, and it was tragically loyal. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, during a house party at the Hartley estate in Hampshire. Edmund's mother hosted the gathering to celebrate the upcoming nuptials. Vincent, despite inventing urgent business, found Edmund's earnest plea impossible to refuse. He went, knowing it was a terrible mistake. The Elizabethan manor and its rolling green hills became the setting for 4 days of polite torture. Dinner each evening meant Vincent was seated too far from Nelly to do more than exchange meaningless pleasantries. Propriety demanded they remain in groups for walks in the garden. Edmund, utterly oblivious, was the picture of a happy bridegroom speaking to Vincent about their practical, secure future. "I truly believe Nelly and I shall be happy together. I may not be passionately in love with her yet, but I think love will come after the wedding." Vincent's throat was tight. "I'm certain Miss Fenring will make you an excellent wife," he managed, the truth tasting like ashes. That night, unable to sleep, Vincent descended to the manor's library. It was past midnight, silent save for the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. He moved blindly through the shadows, desperate for distraction from the torment of knowing Nelly slept just 2 floors above. He did not hear her enter. "Your Grace!" Vincent spun, his heart lurching. Nelly stood in the doorway, wrapped in a dressing gown of pale blue silk, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, like a dangerous phantom. "Miss Fenring," he said hoarsely, "you should not be here." "I know," she whispered, stepping into the library and closing the door behind her. "I could not sleep. I have tried, Vincent. I have tried so hard to do what is right, to be what I should be, but I cannot. I cannot stop." She broke off, pressing her hand to her mouth, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Vincent, who had held himself together through sheer force of will for weeks, finally shattered. "Neither can I," he said roughly, crossing the space between them in 3 strides, stopping just before her, his hands clenched at his sides to prevent himself from touching her. "From the moment I met you, I have thought of nothing else. I cannot breathe without wanting you. I know it is wrong. I know I am betraying Edmund, but I love you, Nelly. I love you with everything I am, and it is destroying me." The words poured out like blood from a wound. Nelly made a broken sound. "I love you too," she whispered. "Heaven help me, I love you so much I think I shall die from it." The confession hung between them, terrible and beautiful. "We cannot," Vincent tried, though every fibre of his being screamed otherwise. "I know," Nelly said brokenly, "but just for this moment, just for now, can we stop pretending?" And before Vincent could think, before he could recall all the reasons this was impossible, Nelly stepped forward and kissed him. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, the breaking of a dam. Vincent's hands framed her face, his fingers threading through her hair. They kissed like drowning people breaking the surface, frantic, graceless, perfect. Vincent tasted salt on her lips and realized she was crying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do?" Nelly whispered. "I cannot, Nelly. I cannot watch you marry him. I cannot stand there and pretend to be happy while you pledge yourself to another man." Vincent's conviction was absolute. As he held her in the moonlight library, Vincent made a silent, irreversible decision. He would not lose her. Not to duty, not to honor, not to anything. Somehow he would find a way, even if it cost him everything he possessed. The morning after the library confrontation, Nelly woke not to relief, but to a wave of crushing physical guilt. She had kissed Vincent Montigue, confessed her love, and tasted the forbidden reality of what they could be. Now, in the cold, unforgiving light of day, she was still Lord Edmund Hartley's betrothed, and she had to face the terrifying consequences of her honesty. Her mind was racing, her heart in turmoil, the memory of Vincent's raw declaration battling the relentless drumbeat of her duty. Hazel Whimsy appeared at her bedside with morning chocolate, her expression carefully neutral, betraying nothing of her feelings. "Lord Edmund sent word that he wishes to take you riding this morning, if you are amenable," Hazel said quietly. "The weather is fine." Nelly's stomach clenched with nausea. "Of course," she managed. "Tell him I shall be ready within the hour." Hazel sat on the edge of the bed after setting the tray down. "Miss Nelly," she said gently, "what happened?" "Nothing," Nelly lied, failing to meet her companion's eyes. "You are many things, but you have never been a proficient liar," Hazel countered, her voice surprisingly gentle despite the severity of the situation. "You did not return to your chamber until well past 2. I heard you." The cup rattled against the saucer as Nelly's hand trembled. She set it down immediately before she dropped it entirely. "I could not sleep. I walked." "Did you walk into the Duke's arms?" Hazel asked bluntly. "Hazel, I am not judging you," her companion said quickly, "but I am frightened for you. Whatever this is between you and his grace, it cannot end." "Well, you know that, do you not?" "I know," Nelly whispered. "But Hazel, what am I to do? I love him. I love him so much it feels as though my heart is being torn from my chest. And I cannot have him. It is impossible." "Is it?" Hazel challenged quietly. "Betrothals have been broken before. Not without scandal, not without destroying reputations. And families," Nelly argued fiercely, desperate to cling to the moral high ground. "My father would be humiliated. Edmund would be, heavens, Edmund has done nothing wrong. He has been nothing but kind and honourable. How could I repay him by breaking his heart?" Hazel was silent for a long moment, allowing the heavy weight of Nelly's dilemma to settle. Then she delivered the single, brutal truth that shifted Nelly's entire moral compass. Would it be kinder to marry him while in love with another man? The question struck Nelly like a physical blow, leaving her utterly exposed. "I do not know," she admitted, tears stinging her eyes. "I do not know what is right anymore." The ride with Edmund was pure torment. He was in excellent spirits, pointing out features of the estate and discussing improvements he hoped to make after their marriage. He spoke of children, converting bedchambers into nurseries, and the sort of sensible life they would share. He was building a future in his mind, brick by careful brick, and Nelly was the utterly undeserving cornerstone of it all. All she could see was Vincent's face in the moonlight, the raw honesty in his voice when he said, "I love you, Nelly." Edmund's voice broke through her thoughts. "You seem rather distracted. Are you quite well?" They had stopped their horses on a small rise overlooking a stream, the morning sun warm on her face. "Forgive me," she said quickly. "I am merely overwhelmed, I think, with all the wedding preparations." Edmund's expression softened with genuine concern. He reached over and covered her gloved hand with his. "I want you to be happy, Nelly. That is all that matters to me. I know ours is not a grand passion, but I hope you feel safe with me and cared for." "I do," Nelly assured him, meaning it. "Edmund, you are a good man. And you are a remarkable woman," he said warmly. "I count myself fortunate every day." The words should have brought comfort, but instead they brought a wave of crippling self-loathing. Edmund deserved better than a bride whose thoughts strayed constantly to his best friend, better than a woman who could barely look at him without feeling crushing guilt. As they rode back toward the house, Nelly saw Vincent standing on the terrace, watching their approach. Even from a distance, the weight of his gaze was a physical demand. This could not continue. Something had to give. That afternoon, Nelly slipped away to the rose garden, needing air, needing space, needing a miracle. She had not been there 5 minutes when Vincent appeared at the gate. "We should not be alone," Nelly said immediately, though she made no move to leave. "I know," Vincent said quietly, stepping into the garden. "But I must speak with you. There is nothing to say. Last night was a mistake. We both know it," Nelly tried desperately. "A mistake." Vincent's voice was low, rough, dangerous. Is that truly what you believe? What else can it be? Nelly demanded, her composure finally cracking. I am engaged to your dearest friend. You and I, there is no possibility of a future, Vincent. We cannot do this. Then I will speak to Edmund, Vincent said abruptly. I will tell him the truth. I will confess what I feel for you, and I will withdraw from his life so that there is no conflict of— No! Nelly cut him off sharply. Absolutely not, Vincent. You cannot tell him. It would destroy him. Not just the betrayal, but losing you. You are closer than a brother. To him. I will not be responsible for that. Then what? Vincent asked, the anguish in his voice breaking her heart. What do you propose we do, Nelly? You marry Edmund in July, and I what? Stand there and watch, smile, offer congratulations, attend dinners at your home for the rest of our lives, and pretend I do not love you? I do not know. Nelly cried. But you cannot tell Edmund. Promise me, Vincent, promise me you will say nothing. Vincent stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, his jaw tight, his eyes searching her face. Very well, he said finally, the admission torn from him. I will say nothing, but Nelly, this cannot end well. You know that, do you not? I know, she whispered. Then why are we doing this? Vincent pleaded. Why are we destroying ourselves for the sake of propriety? Because some things matter more than our happiness, Nelly said, the words tasting like poison. Edmund's trust, our family's honor, the promises that have been made. We do not have the luxury of selfishness, Vincent, not people like us. People like us, Vincent repeated bitterly. You mean people with titles and reputations to uphold? To the devil with all of it, Nelly. What good is honor if it means living a lie? I will not be the woman who destroys two good men for her own desires, she choked out. Vincent closed his eyes, his whole body rigid with frustration and pain. When he opened them again, they were desolate. Then this is goodbye, he said quietly, his voice hollow. Because I cannot stay, Nelly. I cannot be near you and not have you. I'm not strong enough. Where will you go? Nelly asked, her voice breaking. Abroad, perhaps, or to my Scottish estates, somewhere far enough that I need not torture myself with your proximity. He took a final step closer, his hand lifting as though to touch her face, then dropping, a gesture of profound restraint. But know this, Nelly Fenring, I will love you until the day I die. And if you ever find that you cannot go through with this marriage, you need only send word and I will come for you. No matter where I am, no matter what stands between us, I will come. That is my vow to you. Then, before Nelly could respond, before she could break down and beg him to stay, he turned and strode from the rose garden, leaving her standing alone, her heart in pieces, clinging only to the weight of his impossible, beautiful promise. The house party concluded the following day. Vincent departed early, citing urgent business in London, a cold, empty smile fixed on his face as he clasped Edmund's hand and promised, falsely, to return for the wedding. Nelly watched him ride away from an upper window, her hand pressed to the glass, consumed by the certainty that she had just made the worst decision of her life. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. The wedding preparations accelerated, fittings for the gown, endless discussions about flowers, and seating arrangements. Nelly moved through it all like an automaton, smiling when expected, agreeing to every suggestion, feeling absolutely nothing. Edmund was attentive and sweet, genuinely trying to deepen their bond. His kindness was a fresh source of pain, for she knew she was defrauding him. Word reached Edmund that the Duke had gone to his estates in Northumberland and showed no signs of returning soon. I confess I am rather hurt, Edmund admitted to Nelly one afternoon. Vincent and I have never gone so long without and corresponding. I hope I have not offended him somehow. Nelly's guilt was a living, gnawing thing. It was mid-June, 3 weeks before the wedding, when everything changed. Nelly had gone with Hazel to the modiste for a final fitting of her wedding gown, a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace. Looking at herself in the glass, dressed in the finery of a bride, Nelly felt absolutely nothing. "I look like a corpse," she said flatly. When the modiste excused herself, Hazel turned to Nelly with an unusual severity. "You cannot do this," she said. "I must," Nelly replied desperately. "The invitations have been sent. The church is—" "That is not what I meant," Hazel interrupted firmly. "You cannot marry Lord Edmund while you are in love with another man. It is not fair to him. It will make everyone involved miserable." "I will learn to be happy," Nelly insisted. "No, you will not," Hazel said. "I have never seen you truly happy, truly alive, until the Duke of Ravenmore looked at you, and I will not stand by and watch you bury that for the sake of avoiding scandal." "It is honor and duty," Nelly argued, her voice trembling. "But what if we are wrong?" Hazel challenged. "What if happiness matters too?" Hazel's words settled over Nelly like a heavy, inescapable truth. "If you truly love his grace, then Edmund deserves to know before he marries you." That night, Nelly lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, turning Hazel's words over and over. By morning, she had made her decision. She would go to Edmund. She would tell him the truth, all of it, and she would give him the choice to end their betrothal. It was terrifying. It might destroy everything. But Hazel was right. Edmund deserved honesty, and so did Vincent. And so, perhaps, did she. Nelly's decision, made in the pale light of dawn, felt less like a choice and more like a necessary act of self-immolation. She knew the cost would be ruinous, but the alternative, marrying Edmund, forever living a lie, and eternally missing Vincent, was a slow, agonizing death of the spirit. She dressed meticulously that morning, choosing a simple, severe gown in dove grey, a colour that perfectly matched the gravity of her intent. She found Lord Edmund Hartley in the sun-drenched breakfast room of the Fenring townhouse, reading the morning papers and awaiting her company. He looked up, his face lighting with his usual kind, open smile. "Nelly, my dear, you look thoughtful. Only a few weeks now," he said, folding the paper and setting it aside, his eyes full of earnest affection. Nelly sat opposite him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The words, so carefully rehearsed, caught in her throat. She had to force them out, cold and flat. "Edmund, I cannot marry you." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Edmund's smile evaporated, replaced by a look of bewildered shock. "Nelly, what did you say? Is this a jest? If you are worried about the arrangements—" "It is not the arrangements," Nelly interrupted, speaking quickly before her resolve could fail her. "It is me. I am so sorry, Edmund. I respect you, and I value your kindness, but I cannot in good conscience take this vow. I cannot marry you." His confusion slowly morphed into a terrible, agonizing hurt. "But why? Have I offended you? Have I done something amiss? I love you, Nelly. I have done everything in my power to be worthy of you." "You have been perfect," Nelly choked out, the tears finally starting to fall. "That is the terrible truth, Edmund. You are kind, honorable, and everything a sensible woman could desire. The fault is entirely mine. I have realized. I have been selfish. I do not love you the way a wife should love her husband, and it would be utterly cruel for me to bind you to a loveless marriage." Edmund gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Is there someone else?" he asked, his voice low and strained. The question was a scalpel, cutting through all her excuses and striking the naked truth. Nelly took a ragged breath. She owed him honesty, even if it cost her everything. "Yes," she whispered, lowering her gaze, unable to meet the wounded depth of his eyes. "I have fallen in love with another man." For a long, torturous moment, Edmund said nothing. His face was a study in pure betrayal. Then a dark realization seemed to dawn on him. "Vincent," he said, his voice barely audible, thick with disbelief. "It's Vincent, isn't it?" Nelly nodded, unable to speak. Edmund pushed his chair back with a violence that made it scrape loudly across the floor. He rose, towering over her, his composure finally failing. "How could you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger and pain. "He is my best friend. We were at Eton, at Oxford. We are closer than brothers. How could you both? How could you betray me so completely?" "He knows nothing of this," Nelly lied. "Protecting Vincent's honor, knowing the Duke had only acted out of love and restraint. He has left London because of me. He asked me to choose, and I chose duty, until I realized that duty to you means honesty. He did not encourage me, Edmund. I chose this. I chose to tell you." Edmund looked at her, then at the empty spot where the wedding invitations should have been, then back at Nelly's devastated face. The initial anger seemed to drain away, leaving him looking suddenly, irrevocably older. "I am ruined," he murmured, his voice hollow. "You have ruined me, Nelly. Our families have been planning this for years. The Earl will never forgive this disgrace." He shook his head, looking utterly broken. "Go," he said, turning his back to her. "Just go. I cannot bear to look at you." Nelly rose, her whole body shaking, and placed the betrothal ring on the table. It seemed tiny, glittering and mocking. "I am so sorry, Edmund. Truly." He didn't respond. Nelly fled the room, leaving him alone with the shattered fragments of his future. The confrontation with George Fenring, the Marquis of Fenring, was, predictably, a hurricane of aristocratic fury. Nelly found him in his study, a room usually reserved for quiet, decisive pronouncements. He stood by the fireplace, one hand gripping the mantelpiece, his face mottled with rage. Edmund, pale and shaken, had gone directly to the Marquis moments after Nelly's departure. "You stupid, utterly selfish girl," the Marquis roared, his voice shaking the crystal decanters. "What in God's name have you done? The wedding is in 3 weeks. The invitations are sent. You have disgraced this family. Do you comprehend the magnitude of this betrayal?" "Father, please. I could not." "You could not?" he thundered. "You could not what? Avoid indulging in some romantic, idiotic fantasy with a man who is not your betrothed? You could not fulfill the duty you have been bred for your entire life? You have reduced my word to nothing. Hartley's reputation is ruined, mine is compromised, and yours is shattered. You will be a pariah, Nelly. No respectable house will receive you. No one will ever look past this scandal." He paced the room like a caged lion. "What man? Who is this man, this worthless rake who has turned your head?" Nelly was resolute. She could not implicate Vincent. "It does not matter, Father. He is gone. He has left London. I simply cannot love Edmund. The mistake was allowing the engagement to proceed at all. A mistake we shall now pay for dearly," the Marquis spat, running a hand over his face. "The wedding is cancelled. I will send word to the papers that you have been taken ill, gravely ill, and that the affair must be postponed indefinitely. But do not think this ends here, Nelly. You will not leave this house. You will not receive callers. You are confined, do you understand, until you realize the utter contempt with which society views this recklessness. You are a prisoner here." Nelly stood her ground, exhausted but strangely relieved. The truth was out. The cage had been broken, though the aftermath was terrifying. "I understand. Father, the scandal was immediate, brutal, and comprehensive. Within days, society had chewed up and spat out the story, embellished with every cruel detail. The indefinite postponement was seen for the lie it was. Miss Fenring's sudden illness was the euphemism, but everyone knew the truth. Miss Nelly Fenring, the sensible, flawless future Countess, had been discovered in an entanglement with an unknown gentleman and had broken the noble Lord Hartley's heart. The Duke of Ravenmore's name was mentioned in hushed, speculative whispers. Vincent Montigue had vanished completely, which only fueled the rumour mill. The Fenring townhouse became an island. Calls were not returned. Invitations ceased. The silence was deafening, the ostracism absolute. Nelly retreated to her chamber, bearing the brunt of her father's cold, absolute displeasure. Only Hazel Whimsy remained her constant, unwavering support. "Do you regret it?" Hazel asked one night, helping Nelly brush her heavy blonde hair. "No," Nelly said firmly. "I regret hurting Edmund. But I do not regret the truth. I cannot live a lie, Hazel. I am not that strong." "So what now?" Hazel asked, her eyes reflecting Nelly's own turmoil in the mirror. Nelly turned to face her, her gaze suddenly filled with a determined, reckless light. "Now, I must go to him." Hazel frowned. "To your father?" "No, to Vincent," Nelly declared. "He told me he would be waiting. He swore he would come for me if I sent word. But I cannot send word now. My father has ensured that every letter is intercepted, every person questioned. I must go to him myself." "Nelly, that is insane. You are confined. You cannot travel unchaperoned. Where would you even go?" "He told Edmund he was going to his estates in Northumberland. I must assume that is where he is. I will not live out the rest of my life a prisoner of my own making. I made my choice, Hazel. Now I must take responsibility for it." The plan they hatched over the next week was reckless and born of sheer desperation. They would use the funds Nelly had accumulated for small personal expenditures and jewellery. They would travel by public stagecoach under assumed names, a journey of immense difficulty and danger for two women alone. Nelly would discard her elegant wardrobe for simple, dark clothes that offered anonymity. Hazel, with her practical nature, took charge of securing the necessary items: a small, sturdy trunk, travel, bonnets, and 2 false names. The night of their escape, a heavy, unseasonable rain was falling, mirroring the chaos in Nelly's heart. Her father was at a late-night session at the House of Lords. As they crept down the back staircase, 2 shadows fleeing the suffocating silence of the disgraced townhouse, Nelly paused at the massive front door. She looked back at the grand, imposing house, her gilded cage. She had chosen ruin, and now she chose freedom. "Are you ready?" Hazel whispered, her own face pale with apprehension. "Ready to face the world," Nelly confirmed, pulling the simple woolen cloak tighter around her. "Ready to find the man who gave me the courage to break free, to Northumberland, Hazel, and pray he is waiting." They slipped out into the darkness and the rain, 2 ladies of quality suddenly cast into the perilous world, abandoning everything they knew for the slim, desperate hope of a love that defied all the rules of society and honor. The journey had begun. The journey north was a grueling testament to Nelly's desperate resolve. 2 days passed in the jolting confinement of public stagecoaches, a world away from the luxury of a marquis's carriage. Nelly and Hazel travelled disguised, their hands calloused, their spirits strained by exhaustion and the persistent fear of discovery. They had heard nothing from Vincent. The silence was an agonizing vacuum, feeding Nelly's deep-seated anxiety that she had indeed ruined everything for nothing. On the morning of the 3rd day, they were perhaps 20 miles from London, having decided to risk the next leg of their journey by hiring a private carriage outside a smaller, anonymous inn. They were barely underway when the carriage suddenly lurched to a violent stop. What on earth? The Marquis of Fenring, who was travelling separately to his country estate, began, leaning out the window in outrage, having decided to travel to Hertfordshire by the same route. But before he could shout, the carriage door was wrenched open, and there, framed by the cold, misting rain, was a figure who seemed to have stepped directly out of Nelly's most fervent prayers: Vincent Montigue. He was rain-soaked, mud-spattered and wild-eyed, looking like a man who had ridden hard and long without rest, but more beautiful and fiercely alive than anything Nelly had ever seen. "Nelly!" he said, his voice rough with urgency, strained from fatigue and fear. "Thank God, I thought I had missed you." Nelly's heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. "Vincent," she whispered, unable to believe he was real. "What is the meaning of this, Your Grace?" The Marquis sputtered from his position. "I must insist—" "Forgive me, Lord Fenring," Vincent said, though his eyes never left Nelly's face. "But I must speak with your daughter privately." Nelly, intervening, spoke with a new, quiet authority that silenced her father. "Father, please." The Marquis hesitated, stunned by the sheer, undeniable force of the Duke's presence. He conceded 10 minutes on the condition that Hazel remain. Vincent reached into the carriage, his movement sudden and powerful, and took Nelly's hand, helping her down into the cold rain. Hazel followed, positioning herself close enough to preserve propriety, yet far enough to grant them a vital sliver of privacy. "I received your letter," Vincent said, his words tumbling out fast. "It was delayed. I left Northumberland the moment I read it. I had been riding for 2 days. Straight." "You came," Nelly repeated, the words breaking on a sob. "Of course I came," Vincent said fiercely, pulling her closer, heedless of the watching eyes. "Nelly, did you truly think I would not? You ended your betrothal. You chose me. Do you understand what that means, what you have sacrificed?" "Yes," Nelly said, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. "And I would do it again." Vincent let out a sound that was half laugh, half desperate sob. "You impossible, maddening, perfect woman," he said. Then, no longer caring who watched, the Marquise, the coachman, Hazel, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. This kiss was a culmination, a promise. It was the absolute, unyielding claim of two souls who belonged together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his dark eyes blazing with triumph and profound joy. "Marry me," he commanded, his voice firm and final. "Marry me not because of scandal or obligation, but because I love you more than I have ever loved anything in my life. Marry me because you are my home, Nelly, and I am yours." "Yes," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." The Marquis, though still furious at the breach of decorum, realized the immense social benefit of his daughter suddenly becoming a duchess. He stiffly granted his blessing. "Come," Vincent said, turning back to Nelly, his joy intoxicating. "I have a carriage waiting. We leave for Scotland tonight." "Gretna Green?" Nelly asked, dazed. "Unless you wish to wait for banns and a proper wedding, though I confess I would rather marry you immediately before anything else can go wrong." Nelly looked at his rain-soaked hair and his fierce eyes, and the answer was easy. Scotland tonight. They were married 3 days later in a small remote church just across the Scottish border. Nelly wore a simple dress of cream muslin hastily purchased. She had no elaborate flowers, no music, and no veil of Belgian lace. But when Vincent took her hand and pledged himself to her, before God and the surprised vicar, Nelly felt more beautiful and more certain than she ever had in all her London finery. "I, Vincent Montigue, take thee, Nelly Fenring, to be my wedded wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, till death thus do part." Nelly, tears streaming down her face, repeated the vows with all her heart. They spent their wedding night in a small, clean room at a village inn. "Are you frightened?" Vincent asked quietly, helping her with the buttons of her dress. "No," Nelly said truthfully. "I have never been less frightened in my life." She was Vincent's wife. She was free to love him without shame or secrecy. Whatever scandal awaited them, they would face it together. As Vincent finally lowered her onto the bed, she pulled him down to her. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," Vincent replied. "Forever, Nelly. I promise you that." She knew with absolute certainty that her choice had been right. Some loves were worth any sacrifice, worth everything. They returned to London 6 weeks later. The scandal was everything Nelly had feared, and yet somehow less terrible than she had imagined. Yes, the gossips were vicious, and certain doors were closed, but Vincent was a duke, and dukes commanded a respect that transcended mere social disapproval. More importantly, Vincent made it clear, through subtle social maneuvering and, when necessary, outright intimidation, that anyone who dared slight his Duchess would find themselves permanently on the wrong side of one of England's most powerful men. Slowly, society adjusted. Invitations began arriving again. The one remaining shadow was Edmund. Vincent had written him a long, anguished letter, apologizing for the betrayal and begging for understanding. Edmund's reply was brief and final. "I wish you both well, but I cannot. I will not maintain our friendship. What you did was unforgivable. Please do not write to me again." The loss of his oldest friend devastated Vincent, who was withdrawn and melancholy for weeks, blaming himself for the ruin of a brotherhood that had meant everything to him. 2 years passed. They built a life of remarkable happiness, dividing their time between London and Vincent's vast estates. They travelled, read together, and settled into a deep, loving companionship. In their 2nd year, Nelly became pregnant, and she delivered a healthy son, whom they named William, with Vincent's dark hair and her grey eyes. It was in the late autumn of their 3rd year of marriage when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Vincent was in his study when the butler brought in the post, which included a letter in the achingly familiar hand of Edmund Hartley. Vincent read it 3 times, his throat tight. Edmund wrote that time and isolation had softened his anger. He recognized the connection between Vincent and Nelly was genuine, rare, even the sort of love that most people never experience. Crucially, he confessed he had met someone, Miss Catherine Ashworth, the daughter of a neighbouring squire. Edmund realized his love, for Nelly had been a pale, tepid thing compared to what he felt for Catherine, and that Nelly's honesty had actually freed him to find the love he was meant to have. Edmund was to marry Catherine that spring, and he wrote, "I find I would very much like my oldest friend to be there. I should like to try to rebuild our friendship. It will not be what it was, but perhaps it can be something new, something honest." Nelly read the letter, tears in her eyes. "He is happy," she said softly, "and he is willing to forgive." "I do want that," Vincent confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because I need his forgiveness, but because Edmund was my brother. If he is willing to try again, then yes, I want that." They attended the wedding the following spring in Hampshire. It was a smaller, more intimate affair. When Nelly saw Edmund at the altar, watching Catherine walk toward him with such naked adoration, she knew with absolute certainty that this was right. This was the woman Edmund was meant to marry. After the ceremony, Vincent and Edmund spoke for the first time in 3 years. The initial awkwardness eased into a genuine, heartfelt exchange. "You are happy," Edmund observed. "We are," Vincent confirmed. "And you with Catherine?" Edmund's face softened. "More than I ever imagined possible. She is perfect for me." He apologized for his own rigid anger and his failure to see that what Vincent and Nelly had was real. Later, Catherine approached Nelly, thanking her for setting Edmund free. "If you had not broken your betrothal, I should never have met him." Nelly felt the last remnant of guilt lift from her shoulders. "He is a good man," she said softly. "I simply was not the right woman for him. But you, I can see that. You are." 5 years later, the two couples were fast friends. They had large families and visited frequently. One evening, sitting together after the children were put to bed, Edmund raised his glass. Too unlikely happiness, he toasted. Nelly caught Vincent's eye across the room, and he smiled. She thought of the girl she had been. The perfect lady trapped in duty, and the woman she was now, who had chosen love, scandal, and truth over convenience. The most fortunate of men, Vincent murmured later, holding her close in the guest chamber. Because I have you. Nelly knew the final truth. They had chosen a path of destruction and scandal, but they had arrived, together, exactly where they were meant to be.